everybody. Welcome back up to the Vinyl Attic, where we're back to doing our 100 albums that should be in your collection, 100 albums that matter, according to me, 100 albums that are worth having on vinyl. We're doing another soundtrack. We did a soundtrack a little while ago. We did the 1980 soundtrack to Times Square, which for a lot of people was a gateway drug into a lot of punk and new wave music. We're going to go a year before that and do something else that's kind of like another door into the world, the wonderful world of punk rock. We're going to talk about 1979, the soundtrack to Rock and Roll High School, starring the Ramones and also Vince Van Patten and Clint Howard. This movie is everything. This movie was everything. Let me take you back in time. Before the days of MTV, before streaming and YouTube, before any of that stuff, it was really hard to see music live, like on TV or on the big screen. There wasn't a lot of options. But one of the things that we had was the midnight movie. That a lot of radio stations across the country would sort of commandeer local movie theaters and at midnight show offbeat cult films. So it might be Night of the Living Dead, it might be Pink Floyd at Pompeii, it might be The Hills Have Eyes, it might be Woody Allen's Sleeper, it might be Flesh Gordon. I mean, there are all kinds of crazy movies that they would show late at night. Often music movies were very popular. So this movie comes out in 1979, August 1979, and hits the midnight movie circuit. In fact, especially in February of 1980, when I turned 16 and got a driver's license and could drive myself to the midnight movies, typically every Friday it would be Rock and Roll High School, and Saturday would be a little movie called Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was my regular routine. And I can't believe my parents just sort of let me go at midnight. Hi, it's midnight. I'm leaving the house to go to the movie theater. I do think, I remember in 1979 when I was 15, my dad took me to a midnight movie screening of the concert for Bangladesh. And I remember him falling asleep during the Ravi Shankar set. So I think he just said, just let him go. And most of the times I did go to the midnight movie, but many times I did not. Many times I drove my little, my Gran Torino, my 73 Gran Torino, to downtown Atlanta to a punk rock bar called 688 with my fake ID and rocked out to real rock. But the Ramones movie, directed by Roger Corman, they were still really underground at this point. They had some records that had been talked about and were being written about in Hit Parader and Cream and Circus Magazine. They just had Road to Ruin out with I Want to Be Sedated on it, which was starting to get some attention, but still wasn't played on the radio. Nobody really knew who the Ramones were, especially in Stone Mountain, Georgia. So this movie was a vehicle. Roger Corman, I think, just sort of picked them because they were this goofy band and created this movie around them about this high school girl, Riff Randall, who writes a song called Rock and Roll High School, and her dream is to deliver it to the Ramones. She camps out for the concert. There's all kinds of wacky hijinks. Vince Van Patten, who I knew from Apple's Way, I think is the TV show he was on, and Clint Howard, Ron Howard's little brother, are in the film. But it's really a vehicle for the Ramones. But there's all this great music in the movie as well, and so you get on this you get the Riff Randall, played by P.J. Souls, her version of Rock and Roll High School. You get the Ramones version, which is remixed by Phil Spector, who was to go on and produce the next album by the Ramones, End of the Century. And a really great live set recorded at the Roxy on Sunset Boulevard in L.A., but also some other cool stuff, including Nick Lowe and Chuck Berry and Brownsville Station and Alice Cooper and Brian Eno, because it wasn't just about punk rock. It's like you can only listen to punk rock. It was about rock and roll. And you could love Chuck Berry, and you could love Led Zeppelin, and you could love Fleetwood Mac, and you could love all this, as long as you loved rock and roll, and punk rock was just a new form of rock and roll. So it was completely cool, at least in my little world in the late 70s, to like the Ramones and Led Zeppelin. It was not incompatible. So you kind of get all this on the soundtrack because it's all just about the love, the great love of rock and roll. In fact, there was a ton of really good songs in this movie, including a bunch of Ramones songs that aren't on the soundtrack. There's a total of 4 Brian Eno songs in the movie that only one of them is on the soundtrack. There's some old Peter Green, Fleetwood Mac. I mean, there's just some, not all of it could fit. I don't think anybody's ever, tried to make a complete soundtrack to this movie. There's a Paul McCartney song in the opening scene that has never been released by Paul McCartney ever. I think somebody covered it once, but there's never been a recording of it. So, like, if the only way to hear this one Paul McCartney song from 1979 is to go see Rock and Roll High School. But for a lot of us, there's a great Devo number on it. There's a great scene where the hall monitors are racing to the Ramones concert to capture Riff Randall, who's not supposed to be there. Here, there is a really great ballad, I Want You Around. And, we think of the Ramones as sort of punk, 1, 2, 3, 4. They had some great ballads. Like their version of Needles and Pins is one of my favorite. And this sort of I Want You Around, which is in the scene in the movie, Riff, who's in love with the Ramones, especially Joey, and how he eats pizza, smoking pot in her room, dreaming of seeing the Ramones, and they're playing in the room with her. And it's kind of a prototype of what later would be a typical MTV music video. So we got the soundtrack because it was a great way to hear the Ramones and these other artists. I mean, I sort of started diving more into Chuck Berry after I heard School Days on this soundtrack. I'm like, oh, there's more than Johnny B. Good. I got to listen to more Chuck Berry. One of the reasons I wanted to feature this on our count through is it's not available on streaming, and I don't think I've ever even seen it on CD. I think the only way to get these versions of these songs in this order is on the vinyl soundtrack to Rock and Roll High School. So important. I don't know if you can see that. That's Riff with the Ramones. We're not students, we're the Ramones. There's a million great lines in this movie about mice blowing up. Anything that's louder than Ted Nugent. I hate mouse work. I've seen this movie thousands of times. I own it. My daughter has seen it. And the end of this movie, they blow it up. They blow up Vince Lombardi High School. And this, at the time, was fun because, you're a teenager and the thing that you dream about doing is blowing up your high school. The explosions they used were so big that some of the people that were working on the set didn't come back because they were afraid of the people that were making this movie. And of course, after Columbine in 1999, I mean, we think of blowing up your high school a little bit differently now, but these were gentler times when you could fantasize about blowing up your high school and horrifying your principal, Mrs. Togar. Ms. Togar. We don't really know if there was a Mr. Togar. Great movie. It so captures the joy of loving rock and roll. I mean, this is one of the things I think about being a punk rocker in the late 70s, is you could be a punk rocker and like Ted Nugent. You could be a punk rocker and blast Led Zeppelin. You weren't sort of in this silo where you're only listening to punk rock. You cared about rock and roll, and punk rock was the new rock and roll. So you could listen to punk rock and Bruce Springsteen and Rush. Like, it was all good. It was, as long as it rocked, it was good. And this album really captures it. So if you can find this on vinyl, worth having. Definitely one of the soundtracks we did a few weeks ago. My top 10 soundtracks, and I left this out. This one should be right there at the top. Rock and Roll High School, 1979. The Ramones and others. All right. I just want to get that in there. There'll probably be at least one more soundtrack as we move through our 100, but this one is definitely one worth keeping. And if you haven't seen this movie, then you deserve to be stuffed in a locker. That's all I gotta say. Rock and Roll High School, one of the best rock and roll movies ever made. Good God. Okay, that's it. Next, we're going to do some jazz. We haven't done jazz in a little bit. We're going to do a really great jazz album, 1960, Max Roach's We Insist, his Freedom Suite. We really need to talk about some good jazz music that might not be on your radar. So that's going to be next on Rock and Roll Radio, Rock and Roll High School, Rock and Roll Attic, Rock and Roll Vinyl Fetish. This was my life. I mean, when I was in high school, I have to tell you, because my name is Randall, they called me Riff Randall or Randall Ramone in my high school. I had the Ramones t-shirt. I had the jeans with the holes in the knees. I had the Converse. I had the whole Ramones shtick going. I was Randy Ramone at Reed Ann High School. because everybody knew every Friday night I was at the midnight movie watching Rock and Roll High School. So this album matters. This band matters. This movie matters. This music matters. All this matters. And you matter. So let's talk about it. Gabba gabba hey!